they're here today in New York. So
Oh, brilliant.
perfect. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because here we are with brand innovators. And Pepsi is one of the most innovative brands in media, but especially the PepsiCo Labs division. But I think a lot of the people that are watching this today might not know the depth and breadth of what PepsiCo Labs do. So can you just how does PepsiCo Labs work?
Yeah, I'd love to give a brief intro. So at our heart, our team, PepsiCo Labs, is really focused on harnessing and enabling PepsiCo to tap into the wealth of innovation stemming from the startup ecosystem. So in today's world, so much of innovation is really being spearheaded by startups. And what PepsiCo Labs does is to find the right startups against the biggest strategic priorities that PepsiCo has, and then to rapidly test them in our business and then scale up the ones that are effective. So for today's conversation, I'm going to focus more on the programs that we run with marketing and media, but my team, PepsiCo Labs, really works across the entire PepsiCo value chain, if you will. So starting all the way from agriculture through manufacturing, supply chain, through to retail execution, marketing, consumer insights, and through to data and analytics, to really focus on our biggest strategic needs. And then we go out looking for the right startups and bring those in to form effective partnerships. So we're pretty broad in how we work, but I think what we really do for PepsiCo is enable us to focus on our biggest needs as we look at startups, because I think, for startups and large corporations like Pepsi, there's so much value to be had in working together, but often we find it extremely challenging to actually work together. I think for those of us on this panel and on this call, whether you've been on the startup side or the corporation side, you've probably experienced some of those challenges. And I don't need to spell them all out,
Sure.
but yeah, for a large corporation, often it can be very distracting, and it's very cool to see what's happening in the startup world, but figuring out exactly how to apply those solutions in our business can often be challenging. So what we do is make sure that we stay very focused as we engage with the startups, and then identify the small set of startups that can really move the needle for our business. It ended up being a little bit long-winded, but hopefully that gives you a grasp of what we do.
It's long-winded. I also was digging into the PepsiCo Labs website as well, which was super cool. So I would say to anyone that wants to look more after this call, they should pop onto there. But just for clarity, you're talking about startups and bring them in for partnerships. It's a partnership, right? It's not, is it an acquisition and you bring the company in-house, or is it a true partnership in the sense that they stay as their startup company and PepsiCo works with them?
Yeah, my official title is Tech Venturing and Innovation. So we do some investments, but our primary focus is really on that strategic partnership. And if investments enable us to form that strategic partnership and further our strategic goals, we'll do that. But really, the crux of what we do is forming those commercial arrangements and partnerships and deep kind of collaborations that enable us to partner effectively with that startup.
That's cool. So you talked to part of the conversation just then was about brands. So let's talk about Pepsi Brands with the depth and breadth of brands at PepsiCo, each having their own goals, their target audiences, their ROI. How are the brands integrated into the labs process to select the company to work hand in hand with? Does it start with the brands? Does it start with corporate and then it kind of fits in like a big puzzle? How does that whole work?
It's a little bit of that. So it's really two ways. So, the way we work with the different functions, what we've found particularly effective is to partner super closely with our global functional leads. So for example, in marketing and media, we partner hand in hand with our global media innovation team, who are deeply wired into our geographic sectors as well as all of our brands. So as we go through that exercise that I was describing of really focusing on our strategic priorities, we get all the input from the brands on what their key strategic priorities are, what they're trying to achieve with their brand and with different types of campaigns. And we factor that into our search and as we evaluate the startups. Then we'll loop back with our recommendations against all these solutions to say, against your brand objectives of these types of objectives plus campaign objectives, these are the types of solutions that will really maximize the results for you. So it's a little bit of a two-way process. We have some recommendations, but it really comes from the needs that the brands have.
And it's a true global initiative, a true global
It
footprint,
is.
correct?
It
So,
is
so
totally.
this whole work from home or working remote was easy for you to pick up because you're probably dealing with your global counterparts quite often.
It means a lot of early hours and late hours, but it truly
Hmm.
is a global program. And we've got sector representation across all of our geographic sectors. And, I think that's the other key thing. So as we work with these scale ups, we're really trying to find the opportunities that we can scale up across our brands and across all of our geographies as broadly as we can. Because otherwise, it's really not going to move the needle for us if it's a niche opportunity with one or two brands or if it's only in one geography. So it's a truly global program, and we're really looking for the opportunities that we can scale across our entire system.
That's really interesting. So, in sticking with brands, because it is the majority of people here say are in the media or marketing sector. So Pepsi is involved in large scale partnerships across the industry, from the NFL to our own MTV Video Music Awards. It seems like large scale partnerships are in PepsiCo's DNA. How is Labs involved in, say, measuring effectiveness of these large scale partnerships? Like, how are you involved there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few areas where we've brought in solutions and formed partnerships that are relevant to this space. One that is exactly in that area is really on a partnership that we formed with a startup that enables us to really try to get to the ROI of some of these key sponsorships. You may be aware that Pepsi, I mean, we're pretty visible in the sports and music scene, but we are one of the biggest sponsors in sports with over, I think, 100 partnerships across professional and college sports teams.
Sure.
And while we definitely have effective measures, not to say that we were starting from ground zero, um, while we do have some effectiveness measures, it's been difficult for us to really pinpoint and have a crystal clear answer to the age-old question of, okay, if I spend this much, and this is a question that we get from our CFO all the time, if I'm approving this CapEx for many millions of dollars to support these teams, what is it actually driving in terms of incremental sales? Of
Mhm.
course, we know that there are other things that go into that equation, but we also want to make sure that we have some visibility into how these large scale sponsorships are actually impacting our business today. And so we've been able to work with an innovative solution that gives us some visibility into this, which brings in a key piece of the puzzle that's been a bit
Sure.
of a gap before, because of course we look at long-term brand equity measures and strategic other strategic considerations, but we also need to and now are able to factor in that kind of more concrete ROI analysis as well. But I mentioned that there are a few areas that touch on this. I think other areas where we've piloted solutions is about how do we amplify some of these large scale partnerships that we
Mhm.
have to really even maximize further the sponsorship dollars.
For sure.
So whether it's engaging with fans in different channels in different ways that are more emerging, I think as media fragments, people are consuming sports and music in different ways.
For sure.
Um, and we're really trying to be at the cusp of things that are happening to test what are the most effective ways for us to really amplify these sponsorships. And then
Sure.
lastly, I think the one thing that I wanted to touch on is how sometimes we're bringing startup solutions together to then co-develop new solutions. So, as we work with different startups, whether it's the startup that's delivering ROI measurement or another startup that's looking more into kind of content integration, we see the opportunity to potentially bring these capabilities together into
Of
our
course.
systems. And this is a case of where we think 1+1 can equal 10,
Right.
with PepsiCo in the piece of the puzzle as well.
Sure.
So I think those are the areas that I wanted to touch on as we spoke about kind of big partnerships and how we are trying to drive greater effectiveness
Of course, and
across
then it's
those.
also about collecting data as well, and figuring out what consumers are going to buy the product, and where you would like to put, say, your ads or your marketing dollars towards. Um, that would lead me into kind of the audience targeted buying. It's like moving that way where you are really trying to seek out the audience. Say, for instance, like within ViacomCBS and our Vantage product, which is all audience based, our audience based buying vehicle. That seems like something that would be a natural kind of marriage here. Is really
Yeah.
seeking out the audiences there. Is that, does Labs get involved to that aspect, to that depth and breadth? as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been one of our priority areas for this year's program and ones preceding as well. I think, across every single industry, across every single company, data and consumer shopper data is becoming more and more important. And it's no different for PepsiCo. We are making a big push to build out our databases, but at the same time, we have to know how to leverage that data, manage that
Sure.
data and all of that internally, but then how do we maximize the usage of that data? So we're looking at various solutions that enable us to, personalize, provide value to our consumers and shoppers, and then also to speak to consumers in ways that are relevant for them. Traditionally, we've been very much brand focused in the way we planned our media and activated our media. And I think with the increasing depth of data and visibility that we're getting into consumers and how they engage with brands across our whole portfolio, it really creates the openings for us to be more audience first in the way we think about our media even, and then go ahead and plan and activate against those.
And it seems like the industry as a whole is going that way as well. I mean, we saw in the upfront this year a lot of people trending towards audience-based buying,
Right.
away, say, from traditional Nielsen demos. So when you put all of that together, your large-scale partnerships, your data-driven, targeted, it's like it just shows how innovative and forward-thinking PepsiCo is. And I love that you are looking for these startups to bring in to enhance what's going on behind the scenes. Like we see what's happening at PepsiCo once they bring it out to the street. But you're really, it's like this, the labs is really almost like the heartbeat within the company of advancing it in forward as rapidly as you are.
I'd like to think so. And I think we have a good balance between really building and enhancing our core capabilities. So things like audience first approach, performance marketing, competitive intelligence, and then also having a pulse on, especially in ad tech and martech, there's so much happening. And it's just, being abreast of everything that's at the forefront of culture. Because, as you probably know, Pepsi places a lot of emphasis on being culturally relevant. And so we want to speak to consumers in ways that they're engaged in today and in the places where they are today. So we want to make sure that we're always kind of have our finger on the pulse, but at the same time, really building on our core operational capabilities in marketing and media as well.
Well, you touched on a really great thing. So culture is very much on the tip of everyone's tongue these days. So it's especially with everything going on for work from home, it's hard sometimes to keep the culture moving when you're at home. So one area within culture is really diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like it's on the top of everyone's mind. Like here at ViacomCBS, DE&I is in our in our DNA. And as me being a member of the LGBT community, it's a passion point of mine. So what we've talked about leading up to here is kind of what makes sense for labs from a tech point of view. How does DE&I fit into labs? Like it might not be the obvious kind of like, oh yeah, DE&I fits into the fabric of it, but how might DE&I be realized in the labs world, in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still have a ways to go, but I'd like to think that it fits into the fabric of what we do. And I think it's awesome, by the way, what you guys are doing at Viacom. And so kudos to you. For PepsiCo as a corporation, we are definitely weaving in DE&I into the fabric of everything that we do. So if you look at our corporate-wide goals of being faster, stronger, and better, so faster in terms of accelerating growth with a view on the consumer, stronger in terms of enhancing our capabilities and really transforming for tomorrow. The better pillar, which is equally the third, is really about weaving in our values into everything we do, and whether that is sustainability or whether that's DE&I. So it's in our overarching corporate-wide goals and really the mandate, and I think it should be. The requirement is for us to think about DE&I in every aspect of what we do. So with labs, I think there are two specific ways that I'd really like to, push the thinking as we work with different businesses. One is, as we look across startups and start forming partnerships, We do have a focus on finding startups with a minority representation, whether it's ownership, management, board representation, et cetera, to make sure that, we are diverse in how we're incorporating different thinking into our solving our strategic priorities. And then I think the second area is finding startups that can be an enabler for PepsiCo as we try to further our DE&I goals in the marketplace. So, an example would be enabling our brands to easily get out their DE&I messages and achieve their objectives. I think for a large corporation like PepsiCo, really where the opportunity is to find solutions that we can scale up, as I mentioned before, across our business. So while it's nice to have a few kind of spot initiatives to get, and that might attract PR, et cetera, I really want to find the solutions that are easy to turn on and implement across our business so we can do this at scale. That's really a personal goal for me.
For sure. So because this is a global initiative and because there are a lot of brands and everyone has different initiatives, how do you is there a prioritization scale of like what brands get what throughout the year? Like if there's a big launch coming up, or if there's a rebrand, or if there's a big event, like how does, like, taking into account everything that we've talked about, and like how do you decide what brand gets what?
I mean, of course, there are the biggest brands that we have, which
Sure.
of course, everyone in the business is very much focused on. We try to find solutions that have applicability across a breadth of our brands across our portfolio. But, of course, as we work with Pepsi and Frito-Lay and some of the biggest brands, we will tend to focus on the needs of those brands as well. So definitely, we prioritize based on potential business impact. So whether that's the size of business, how much it's contributing to growth, et cetera, that's really how we prioritize across our business areas.
Okay, cool. So now we have kind of like a framework of what goes on at PepsiCo Labs. Might you have an example or two of what you might be working on now to kind of give us a real life example of what's working? A feel good initiative, perhaps, because it's Thursday and a feel good initiative is always good, or something just to kind of that people can bite on a little bit and understand what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few cool solutions, and I won't mention them by name, but I'll mention a few that we're scaling up, the types of solutions. So one is a solution that leverages computer vision and AI to really pre-test every single piece of digital content before we put it out there. We actually only tested this in our business about 1.5 years ago, and we discovered that a lot of our digital content wasn't even meeting our internal best practices, let alone kind of industry best practices. And so I feel like the best solutions are the ones that you scratch your head and say, oh my God, this is a no-brainer. Why wasn't somebody doing this before? And why weren't we doing this before? So it's I'm sure that there is a lot of deep tech behind it, but as a solution, when we communicate it out to the business, it's a solution that we're embedding into our own internal platforms and then mandating our business to put every single piece of digital content through it, to say it has to meet a minimum certain threshold before we can put it out. So I think those are the types of solutions that we're looking for, where every scale up is going to be challenging. And, aside from finding the solutions, piloting it, really the big challenge is scaling it across our business, especially where there's change management involved, as I'm sure all of you are very familiar with.
Of course, yes.
So it's really about finding the solutions that we can embed and roll out and drive that change management across our business.
Totally.
So that's one example, but happy to give you others.
I mean, sure. Like, is there one that like comes to mind other than that you could be maybe a little more specific on?
I mean, we've talked about a few, and as you mentioned before, we have our website where we go into some of the startup partnerships where we're starting to scale up with those partners. Another one is in the area of content integration, and I'm not sure how much we want to go deep into this one, but It's really about enabling our brands to appear in front of consumers, as I mentioned before, in ways that are relevant to them in the right moments with the right message. So I think personalization at scale is top of mind for everyone as we try to leverage all the masses of data that we're collecting,
Of course.
and trying to turn that into value. And there are so many different solutions that target personalization these days. So we're looking at across all of those and seeing which ones really drive value for our business.
Well, and of course,
And
because
also value for the consumer ultimately, because
right.
that drives, I mean, we have to provide a bit of a value exchange if we're really trying to drive our business.
Right, of course, and it's also the organic integration of brands into content, because like at ViacomCBS, where content creators are always trying to figure out, okay, let's get brands into our programming. It's not. Sometimes a brand comes in and you're like, okay, that really doesn't make sense. Like this, it's not going to work. And it's the authentic. It's not just throwing like a Pepsi can into something without it having meaning in some way, shape, or form. So I know we had spoken earlier about different ways and different companies that you're working with to do product integration into programming. There is one that came to mind, and I would love if you could just talk about it, because you were very passionate about what was working with that company, with Miriam.
Yeah. So I mean, we're really excited with this partnership because one thing, I mean, aside from the core of what they do is, which as you mentioned, is post-production content placement. And it's really about finding the ideal situations to place our brands, logos, content, etc. I think the exciting thing in working across all of these startups is finding new opportunities to co-develop together. And as I mentioned before, in the area of personalization, looking into kind of dynamic placements to see whether we can differentially serve up different content to different people, depending on what we know about them and what their context is, what they're watching, time of day, etc. Or thinking about how to amplify some of our sponsorships in live events through placements. I mean, all of those are really exciting areas and really cool to think about what's possible.
Well, because also it's sometimes brands aren't just ready to integrate during the production cycle. So for instance, with us at ViacomCBS, Bubbly integrates into RuPaul's Drag Race. So we have enough runway to get the product into the show. What's interesting about this is like, okay, a brand comes in, they find out their objectives. Unfortunately, the show has been shot. So it's trying to figure out, how do you still strategically get that brand into it? And it's great that there are ways now that you can do that. And Pepsi, of course, is on the forefront, as usual, of doing that type of a partnership. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's room for both, right? There's probably like those big integrations where it's really incorporated into what's happening into the content. And then there are other areas where there could be benefits, as you mentioned, logistically and everything else, of doing it post-production and much more dynamically. And also not having it in perpetuity, as it goes through reruns and various other things, you can switch out brands and products, etc. So I think there's room for both. And I think that's the way we think about it. I don't think it's necessarily replacing in every sense traditional content placement. It's really what avenues does it open up through this new technology.
It's complementary. It's not replacement.
Exactly.
So, because I mean, authentically getting in it in the beginning, even sometimes scripting storylines or what's going on, that's the most impactful, is getting the brand in from the ground up and building a story around it with the creators, because the creators are they're very into what they're creating, as Pepsico is very ingrained in what their products are putting out. So that's the best marriage, is to do it from the beginning if you can. But so another thing that I'm just curious about is you touched on culture. So Pepsico Culture, just dealing with PepsiCo and over the years that I've dealt with the team via OMD and all of that, Pepsi is very culture centric, very much like ViacomCBS, where it's bring your complete self to work. I know we touched on DE&I on how it relates to labs, but just in general, like talking about culture, I'd love to just get into a quick conversation about that, because culture is so important in today's day. So how do you bring your complete, like yourself to work every day? because we are on Zooms, and you are dealing, I know you had said you were dealing with Tel Aviv and you're dealing with different places. Like, how does Jenny represent herself and bring herself completely to work every day?
You mentioned, I think we mentioned at the beginning in the intro that I've been at Pepsi a long time. So now it's actually been 16 years I've been at Pepsi. And I would say I've had a lot of cool roles during that time, strategy and M&A, partnerships, etc. This is probably the most fun role that I've had. So I think that really helps in bringing my whole self to work, because it's such a fun role, and we get to see not only what's happening at the forefront of culture and like cutting edge technology, but I really feel like my team is focused on the biggest strategic opportunities and critical priorities for PepsiCo as a whole. Whether it's digitization and transformation, incorporating data and analytics into everything we do, whether it's e-com and DTC and forming first-party relationships, retail execution, sustainability, etc. I feel like we look across the PepsiCo business and kind of cherry pick the biggest strategic priorities to focus our efforts against. So for us as a team, I mean, that's hugely invigorating, and I think it helps a lot to create the culture of the team. We have a relatively small team, as you mentioned before. It's global, so we have a couple of people in Tel Aviv, some in London, others in North America, and we're building out. But I think we feel seamless. While COVID has been hugely disruptive for across the world, for us, we're probably as effective as we've ever been in working with the various global teams and just getting that energy through the system. Because I think what we bring is really that spirit of innovation and challenging the way we do things. I mean, not to say that we don't already have it at PepsiCo, but it's just like that breath of fresh air to lift people out of their operational day-to-day roles and kind of their day-to-day priorities, and to lift the thinking a little bit to think, okay, horizon 1, 2, 3, what are we solving for, and what's our end vision, and how do we get there? So, we hold these and not to go too much into it, but we hold these sessions like immersion sessions and program kickoffs where we really encourage the business. And we used to host these in Tel Aviv, and we'll do so in Silicon Valley, but we're really encouraging people and our executive team to get away from their day-to-day a little bit and think, beyond the construct of our business today, to think really creatively. So, sorry, I think I deviated a little bit from the question.
No, that's culture, totally, but... no, please, that's totally fine. Just curious, and something that just popped into my head is, how do you find the startups? Like, there are so many startups out there. Like, how do you pinpoint the ones that you're going to work with?
Yeah. And this is where I think where we as Pepsico Labs, we are building a reputation for being effective. We've been around only for about 3 years, but we've already put 115 plus pilots into the market. And we're already scaling up 17 plus solutions of the healthy pipeline coming up. And I say this because I think we're building a reputation for being effective in bringing and scaling up startups into a large corporation. So as we talk with the large ecosystem of VCs, accelerators, incubators, we can point to our track record and our reputation and really try to attract the best of the best startups. Because as you mentioned, so many, like it's such a vast area these days. And then we work with our business experts to really filter through those solutions and identify which ones we think are the leading technology. We bring the kind of the know-how and the expertise in terms of startups and and the reputation in the VC community, and we also talk with other corporations and people in similar roles to us across different industries and see their experience with various startups. So that's really the process that we go through to really try to find the best of the best startups.
Great. That's super. Yeah, it's just like my mind was like, oh my God, there are so many. How you just pinpoint the 1, 2, 3, 5.
I feel like we've evaluated.
It must be overwhelming.
Sometimes when we get lists and then we feel like we've evaluated, I think we've already evaluated a mountain of startups. But usually we'll go into a program with maybe 3 to 5 priority areas or problems
Right.
that we're trying to solve. And we might find 15 that we want to engage in further discussions with. And then, we go in pretty deep with those and then select a much smaller set that we want to pilot. So the numbers dwindle down very quickly. Because,
Well, and
we don't want to,
right. I was
we
going to
don't
say
want
you
to
have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in tech.
So I think through that, we can cull a significant portion of those startups pretty early on. But then we definitely don't want to inundate our system with too many startups, because that's not good for anyone. It's not good for us. It's not good for the startups. So we want to make sure we stay focused on a small number of startups, especially as we get to the scale up stage. And then it's really about the 1 or 2 coming out of each program that we then want to explode out throughout the business.
Makes total sense. So I just wanted to remind people that are watching, if they have any questions, to throw it in the Q&A section on the Zoom, and we can get to them in a few minutes. We're a few minutes out of questions. So one question I have, because it seems to always come up when we do these types of things in general, is, look, you've been at PepsiCo for a long time. I've been at ViacomCBS for 19 plus years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's, when you find a great place.
It flies by though, right? When you have
oh my God,
fun.
it flies by. But it's also I agree with you. If you don't have the different iterations of jobs, like I was at a startup when I was working at Logo TV, the LGBT channel. So it keeps it fresh and moving forward.
Exactly.
But mentorship is something that comes up. And when you work, say, within a smaller group of PepsiCo or with labs, how does mentorship play into your world? Like, it's important for a lot of people, but you're out there trying to find tech and do all this kind of stuff. How does your team engage in kind of like the global world of PepsiCo beyond labs in maybe the mentorship world?
Well, I think the thing that's also been a key element of our success is that we're so embedded with the business. So I think often in large corporations, the groups that work with startups tend to be a little bit on their own and very external facing. I would say we're equally, if not more, internal facing as we are external facing, because it's one thing to find the solutions, but then another completely different thing to wire them into our business, especially with a large organization, as you know, with Viacom, it's heavily matrix. You have to know how to navigate the system. A few of us on the team have been at PepsiCo a while and know the different areas of business. So we are deeply anchored into all the different global functions, as well as the executive and the C-suite. So I think that opens up so many mentorship opportunities for us to stay closely connected. And especially because we are working on such kind of high priority areas, it enables us to stay very closely connected with the leadership teams. So I think that's how we stay very anchored in with the business and develop those mentoring relationships. I will say one other thing on that topic. I think, the other thing that we can offer startups, I think for startups these days, really, they're not necessarily looking at corporations as an avenue for money, because there's just so much money out there, and there are VCs and other people who are much better at investing than we are, because that's all they do. But they're really looking at corporations as a way to get industry expertise and that kind of mentorship, as well as access to scale. So as we form these partnerships, we make sure we match them up with the right industry experts that can really help drive these startups forward in the industry as well. So I just wanted to add that on the mentorship point.
That's super cool, because I was just thinking like in the world of mentorship or touching like the executives and things, Labs is in a fortunate position because you touch all aspects of the business. So there are a lot of people at companies where you're siloed in your division. It's like, for us, you're in ad sales, you're in marketing, you're here, there. But in labs, you truly are touching all of PepsiCo in some way, shape, or form throughout the year. So you're touching the media and the marketing people at one, touching probably distribution in another place. So it puts you in the unique position where your team has multiple touch points of mentors around, which is a nice place to be.
Yeah, and I think on that point, it enables us to be a bit of a connector as well, so that we can connect different people across the organization. And just because, I think so many problems these days span across traditional functions, and I
Right,
think
of course.
the old approach of trying to solve a problem within a function, and we, as with every other large corporation, can tend to be quite siloed, especially in large geographic areas like North America. So
Yep,
being able to be that connector also adds value to what we do as well.
that's super cool. So I'm going to flip to the Q&A portion of this now because we have a bunch of questions that are populating in, and as I'm reading them, they're like really interesting. So let's start easy. What is the top lesson that PepsiCo has learned coming out of COVID about how to do business differently?
I think with every other business, it's about flexibility and agility. So being able to adapt. Of course, and also speed. Oh my goodness, the rate
Right.
of change has accelerated so much. Things that we were anticipating to happen in 2 to 3 years are already here. So, us building these strategic 3 to 5 year plans, we've got to make that happen tomorrow.
Mhm. Right.
So agility, adaptability, speed, and I think the way we've laid it into labs. The other part of what we do at labs is try to enable PepsiCo to move more quickly. So it's great to be able to work with startups, but as I mentioned before, often there's a cultural divide. Startups want to move fast, and corporations have their processes and things that take a long time.
Mhm.
So we've adapted our processes to enable us to move much more quickly as we work with a startup and put that initial pilot into market and then work towards scale up.
Really.
So I think that's a key learning from COVID, and one that we're integrating very closely with just fundamentally how we do things at PepsiCo Labs.
So if COVID hadn't happened, do you think you would be that far advanced with all of that? Like, did COVID actually COVID in a weird way help propel that more rapidly?
In a way, yes.
In
And
a way.
also it's put a lot of focus into finding solutions against problems that we need to solve now.
Sure.
So because like even in marketing and media, the landscape is evolving, and just in terms of the new things that are emerging, it's happening so quickly
Right.
that it puts a lot of emphasis on us finding the right solutions and partners with each of our programs. So it's probably given, again, we may have lucked out to some degree from the disruption of COVID. And
sometimes disruption is good.
Tailwinds.
Yeah,
Yes,
for sure.
yes,
Sometimes.
agreed.
So next question that popped up: what's a marketing challenge that you feel needs to be addressed in the next year or two, like whether through the work that you do or otherwise?
That audience first approach.
Mhm.
So audience first, personalization. I think there are many solutions against this. But in terms of really driving effectiveness in this space, I'm not sure if anyone's totally cracked the nut. So, providing that value to consumers in a way that's actually valuable for them.
Sure.
We've tried a number of personalization at scale solutions, and I don't know whether we've fully yet demonstrated that the additional cost of doing so is bringing the required benefits. So I think while personalization is at the tip of everyone's tongue, I don't think anyone's got the 100% proof plan of how to exactly execute against that right now.
Okay.
So
That's fair. Yeah, for sure.
I think we've made great
progress.
Course. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
But I think there's still a ways to go to really leverage all the data that we're collecting.
Mm-hmm.
And putting so much value on, right?
Sure. So then another question that popped up by a different person was, do you think that social data and insights are a good source to guide your innovation and strategy moving forward?
I think it's one key input, but we have a lot of data, and I think a challenge is harnessing all that data and extracting the right insights. So, for every company these days, it's not that there is some element of collecting the data, but we're all sitting on mountains of data. So social, I think all of that is critical input, but there's so much else that really needs to be factored into driving innovation.
Mhm.
So I'm, we work very closely with our data and analytics team as well. And it's about like, how do we manage our data? How do we make sure that it's providing a cohesive view across all the different sources of data? I mean, these are all key challenges that we haven't really fully solved yet. To enable us to innovate and progress.
Well, while I'm fascinated by what you do, I do not envy your position. Trying to figure it out, bring everyone in and all that. So then, next question: what can heritage brands learn from newer digital-first brands when it comes to authentically marketing to Gen Z?
Yeah, a great question. We have our share of heritage brands and brands that are extremely at scale. So it's difficult for us to be quite as nimble as some of the new emerging brands. But I think we, again, having our finger on the pulse, seeing what the relevant ways are to find audiences where they are, engage with them authentically in a way that's authentic with our brand, right? So it's got to be authentic to the consumer, but it's got to be authentic to the brand. But a key challenge for us is, how do we do that at scale? So, all these influencer campaigns and social, I think we do have strong initiative against all of those and these emerging areas, but really to move the needle for brand Pepsi or for Lay's, we have to do things at scale. And so I think there's definitely lessons to be had from looking at how, smaller, newer brands are doing that, but we have to crack the nut of then how do we translate that into a model that works for the scale of our business.
Yeah, scale is key. I mean, at us at ViacomCBS, it's about like the meaningful reach and scale between broadcast, cable, streaming, experiential, social. It's really about like finding people where they are, whether they're watching a screen, they're at a live event, they're at the VMAs, they're wherever they are. It's how do you reach them effectively, and by using the tools to get to them. So doing strategic partnerships to get to those people as best you can. And I think I believe to my core, because I've worked with Pepsi for so long, like that's why the VMAs work so well with PepsiCo, because it's like there's the scale that you're hitting these people globally for that night a year, and then the social amplification behind it, and just the involvement year after year is just it's wonderful to partner with Pepsi.
No, it's awesome. And like it really brings that scale, but then there are, as I was mentioning before, there are opportunities around it to even amplify it even further, right? So and engage in ways that are innovative and really pushing that sponsorship into new areas. So
for sure. It's not looking back, it's looking forward. So it's looking to see where we can take it. So staying on the Gen Z world. So what effect do you think the Gen Z generation will have on corporations and brands as a whole as they move into leadership roles in the next 20 to 30 years? So, when they take our jobs.
I mean, I think we're starting to see that, and I think it's transforming the culture of the business. So challenging how we do things today, and really kind of taking a fresh perspective at how we operate. How we've always done things. A lot of people at Pepsi, especially in the operational groups, have been there a while, and they're to some degree kind of used to the way we do things. But I think really kind of that Gen Z mentality that's spreading throughout the company is, how can we do this smarter? And even challenging the basics of the business model, which is great to see. If we think about like innovation in the food and beverage world, considering how much the world has changed over the past 50 years, food and beverage still pretty much looks similar. I mean, there has been innovation, but we're still talking bottles and cans and fountain. So I'd love to see like how much we can really push the thinking in terms of innovation and the way we do things and business models, etc. And I think Gen Z, but I think it's more than Gen Z. I think it's like the fast pace of change today is spurring everyone, even the non-Gen Zers, to think that way. I do think the new generations coming in will aggressively push on, you know, if I outlined the 3 corporate goals before, kind of that better pillar around sustainability and DEI, which will be great to see.
So you touched on sustainability. So a question popped up. It said, what is Labs doing in terms of innovation in the area of sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit off the topic for today, but we are doing a lot. We're finding some exciting technologies in manufacturing, in agriculture, that's really driving sustainability. You know, I live out in California, and we had rain for the first time I moved out here about almost 2 years ago, and I can count like less than one hand the number of times it's rained. So water is a key threat, I think, almost to us going forward. And water sustainability is one area that we've really been able to push through our manufacturing agenda. We found some AI solutions that really have saved us millions and millions of liters of water across our business in our manufacturing plants. I see Toya coming back in, so
I see Toya.
I'll give her a chance to speak.
Hi, Toya.
Hello.
Thank you.
Just having a nice old chat.
So much. I learned so much. The intersectionality between tech and what you do is very fascinating. Thank you.
Oh my God,
so
I
much.
agree with you, because I like get smarter. I got smarter when we talked the other day, and now I get smarter. It's just, this is what the Brand Innovators does. It brings like people together from kind of different worlds and really just gets a conversation going, and you start to learn a little bit about each other. So
yeah, it's amazing.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was so fun to be here today. And great to speak with you again, Ed.
Absolutely, Jenny. It was so great.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Jenny.
You got it.
So now we're moving on to our last session of the day, but don't go anywhere because you don't want to miss our conversation with the speaker, Shivram Vaidiswaran. I hope I didn't butcher that too bad. Please correct me. Head of brand at Uber, and our moderator, Crystal Eastman, who's the CMO at Zeta Global. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here.
How do you pronounce your last name? I'm really bad at names, and I want to get better. It's super important that we're calling people by the names that they choose. So how do you pronounce your last name?
Sure. It's all phonetic. It's Shivram Vaidiswaran. And so there are no silent letters. It's actually spelled or spoken exactly as it's spelled.
Got it. Vaidiswaran. I got it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And mine's easy for you, Toya, so don't worry about it.
Crystal, how are you?
So good. I love Advertising Week New York. I was just thinking about it, and I think it's basically my favorite holiday of the year. Next to Halloween.
I love it.
Even fun when we're mostly virtual, like we are today.
I know. I can't wait till we'll be able to do this soon, where we can actually toast a glass together.
Yes, totally. So Shivram, it was so great to meet you last week. And you're about 1 year into your Uber adventure, at this point. I learned last week when we met that we both started new jobs during COVID and had fully virtual starts. Quite an experience, for the record books. How has it been for you, your experience onboarding in the middle of a pandemic and stepping into a leadership role with a team that you've never met?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough, I think, starting a new job, even when you're in the office and trying to find out who you get to go to lunch with. But doing it virtually has definitely been a completely new experience. I think, a couple things come to mind. One is when you're starting with a brand new team, I think you have to take some time to create those personal connections and relationships. And those don't always happen over your one-on-one on Zoom. And, you miss some of those, like, chats at the water cooler or times to go grab coffee or, times where you get to chat after a meeting and you're like, what was that all about? Those moments are a little bit harder to have when you're on Zoom. And so I think making time for some of those personal connections, understanding how people are feeling, how people are doing, what's going on in their lives outside of this little square that's on your screen, I think is incredibly important. I think the second thing is, like, we all have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. Like, this is the first time any of us are having to go through this, like, starting a new job without ever meeting anyone, everyone's going through, a lot of emotions in terms of the way that the past 18 months have gone. It's been great for some, it's been really challenging for others. And so I think you just have to say, this is a whole new world and we're going to have to hold hands and work on this together. And then I think the last piece is like leading on teams, joining any organization, especially coming into leadership, you've got this amazingly smart group of people that are working on your team. And I think giving yourself the ability to learn from them is incredibly important. Don't come in and try to change the world overnight. I don't think that's what you were hired for. There are amazingly smart people there who have been doing great work. So how do you make sure that you're harnessing that and then bringing your spin to it when the time is right?
Yes, first do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath is applicable to every profession, when you're starting a new job. I